25, 40, run, William, run! He's got blockers in front, 5, touchdown! Joshua Cribbs! Snap back, ball down, can't block! They block the kick!
This is the Orange is Orange and Browns podcast from the Press Play Podcast Network. I'm your host, Chase Smith, and with me, as always, Browns insider Jeremy Powell. Jeremy, how the heck are you, buddy?
Doing good, Chase. Can you believe the season is upon us? It seemed like it was the longest offseason ever, yet now the shortest offseason ever. Cannot wait to get started. Cannot wait to talk to our special guest tonight. Ready to roll, bud.
And also with us, she is the brand spanking new host of this very podcast, one of the newest hosts on the Press Play Podcast Network. You can catch her writings at Awful Announcing, hear her on the Set the Edge podcast. Holly Wetzel. Holly, what's up?
Good evening. Good evening. My heart is full of orange and brown and excitement right now.
We are so
close.
Go.
We are so close.
Let's go. Well, joining us to help us talk about all things preseason, Browns, orange and brown scrimmage, expectations, all of that. He's a sports writer for the Associated Press covering your Indians, your Browns and Cavs, and whatever else happens in the championship city. Tom Withers. Tom, welcome to the Orange is Orange, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be with you guys.
Great. Whenever we have media professionals on, it's always really, really exciting because we read your work, we just consume your content, and it's so freaking cool. So first, thank you for being here for reals. I know we just said that, but man, thank you. And I would just love to get to know Tom Withers a little bit. Tom, did you always know you wanted to get into like journalism from a young age, or when did that really begin to blossom?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, media professional makes me sound much more than so thanks for that. I was a little kid that always had kind of a news bug, if you will. My mom was radio and television. She was a musical librarian in Buffalo, New York. And so she kind of steered me towards communication, but back in the 60s and the 70s, that was not nearly what it is now. So I always had, kind of had the dream of playing third base for the Cleveland Indians, but when that became not possible, I figured might as well get into journalism and cover sports. So I've been really lucky. I've had a wonderful run. I started in the mid 80s in New York City, working for United Press International, which was AP's top competition at the time. And then got a job with the AP in the early 90s. I've been there for 27 years now. Been really lucky, World Series, covered 10 Olympics, Final Fours. Still haven't been to a Super Bowl though. So that's still on my bucket list, and maybe that'll be right around the corner. We'll see.
Hey man, I'm liking your chances this year, Tom. I really am.
I'm liking my chances too. It's like, finally, it actually feels like there's a real possibility. I mean, those Super Bowl dreams that everybody here in Cleveland has had their entire lives. And I do need to let you know as well. While I didn't live in Ohio as a kid, I did go to Ohio State. My dad was with the Hoover Company based in Ohio, and we moved all over the country. So I was that kid that went to 8 schools in 12 years, but grew up as Cleveland fans. So I was born into that cursed existence of being a Cleveland fan. So I know what it's all about. I can recite Red Right 88 and the fumble and you name it, just like any other Clevelander. So while I can't be a fan anymore because I'm supposed to be an impartial journalist, the Browns are still there in the depths of my heart. That's for sure.
Tom, was there a specific moment when you were like, wow, I cannot believe this is my job. This is my life. They pay me to do this. Is there a moment you can point to that you really said, wow?
I've had more of them, Jeremy, than I could ever believe. So the one that I'll reference only because I have it on my Twitter page is my first assignment in 1992. My first Olympic assignment was covering the Dream Team. I mean, it's all been downhill from there. I mean,
wow,
what a way to start, right? I mean, the greatest team ever assembled. So, and they had one practice while we were over in Barcelona at a college. And I happened to be sitting on the bench while they were practicing and they were wrapping up. And then Michael Jordan came over and sat next to me before he began his group interview. So that's the picture that I have.
Wow.
Twitter.
Oh my gosh.
Wait, is that the famous Barcelona practice?
So the famous practice they always talk about though didn't take place in Barcelona where they put college guys. That was actually over here before. Or no, I'm sorry. It was in Monte Carlo.
Okay.
To Barcelona. So they just had like a regular practice in Barcelona that day. So anyway, long story short, that photo that's on my Twitter page was the front page of the Barcelona newspaper the next day. So during one of the early Olympic, qualifying games, I went down at like halftime of like Angola versus France or whatever. And I was with Bob Ryan from the Boston Globe.
Mm-hmm.
Walked up to a concession stand and ordered like a couple of sodas or whatever. And the kid behind the stand points at me and he says, Michael Jordan. I said, no, I'm not Michael Jordan. No, Michael Jordan. So he runs back, brings out the cover of the newspaper, and it's me and Michael. And I'm like, so as you guys can imagine, the first thing I did was run to the closest kiosk I could and bought like 40 copies of the newspaper. But what a souvenir, right? And what
oh my gosh.
That was kind of one of those pinch me, is this really happening moments.
Oh,
Incredible.
Tom, so how did you go? So with covering the Olympics and all of that, I mean, to wonderful Cleveland, Ohio. I mean, it's not, Barcelona, but it's kind of up there. So how did you make that transition from
it's
doing that to Cleveland?
Yeah. So in the mid 90s, I was one of the AP's national baseball writers in New York, and the Cleveland job opened up. The guy who was in Cleveland had taken a job then in, of all places, in New York with Newsday. And so the job opened up and I applied for it and I got it. So I came here. I actually came back postseason of 1998 with the Indians, and then began with the expansion Browns. Some of those Tim Couch, Jim Pine, whoever else was on that team. I can hardly remember those guys anymore. So I came back with the expansion Browns and have been lucky enough to have been here for 22 years now.
So you had the World Series, you've had the NBA Finals, and really all you need is the Super Bowl, Tom, to kind of get the triple crown here, man.
Yeah, which one do you want more, Tom? By the way, what do you rather see first, Browns or Tribe at this point?
That's
that's a great question. I always find it interesting too, the divide in this town. And while Cleveland fans are Cleveland fans through and through, the way Browns fans feel differently than Indians fans, than Cavs fans do about, especially about 2016 and who won it. I mean, and I know some Clevelanders that just don't accept that the drought is over because it was the Cavs, which I just think is just so crazy, right? But and we always envisioned the Indians getting over the hump at some point, and God only knows, 97 was as tough as it can get, and then 2016 was probably even worse. So it's a Browns town, let's be honest, right? It's a football town, it's a football region. This is where football was born for all practical purposes. So I think seeing the Browns, first of all, I think seeing the Browns just get to the Super Bowl would be such an accomplishment.
Oh my gosh.
Winning it. I'm a native. I'm from Buffalo. My mom was from Buffalo, and I know what that fan base has gone through, making it to 4 straight Super Bowls and losing all of them. But I think everybody here would gladly, trade for the chance just to make one of them.
Yeah. Tom, I have a question that we've never asked anyone before. And if this flops, I'll just edit it out and we'll just continue on. You work for AP. You mentioned Bob Ryan. Have you ever been asked to be on Around the Horn, or how does that work? Cause I feel like you'd be a great candidate to get up there and do your thing, man.
Thanks. Yeah. So for a long time, the AP was really restrictive on what we were allowed to do. And then obviously, as you guys know, in the advent of social media over the last 10 years, they've kind of had to loosen their policies because, I mean, this just helps our brand, right? It gets the name out there. It allows the AP to get people to know the face behind the byline, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So, they've been good about that. And I've been asked a few times, and I've been on some of those ESPN shows, not necessarily those, the talking head kind of shows or whatever, but I've done enough of those to feel like I've gotten, I've checked off that bucket list, if you will.
Cool. What has been just a delightful interview? You look back and that was just like a great interview. Someone that you just really enjoyed getting to know or talking with as far as athletes go.
Wow, that's a really great question. I've been lucky enough to do a bunch of Olympics, and I've always been really intrigued by those great stories that, I mean, they're Olympics for a reason, right? And in fact, last week when we were watching the Tokyo Games, I was watching with my son, and they were running, I think it was the men's 1500. And I think people forget, they always talk about the gold medal winner and who finishes second and third. Sometimes the best stories there are the guys that finish at the back, right? It's the guy from Tanzania who has overcome so much in his life to be able to get to the Olympics. So, no one interview stands out. I think, for me though, I was lucky enough back in 2002 when LeBron had first kind of broken through and it was his rookie year. I had a sit down exclusive with him at the time, which was kind of unheard of. And it was, again, because of the company that I work for, really allowed me to, build trust within the LeBron group. And I had a sit down with him over at a Methodist church in downtown, or the east side of Cleveland rather. And he kind of opened up for the first time about all that he had gone through with he and Gloria in those days in Akron with not knowing where their next meal was coming from and moving from house to house. And it was really the first time that LeBron had opened up on it. And what was interesting about it was it took about 15 minutes for me to get there with LeBron. And unfortunately, once he finally started to go there, a couple of his handlers shut him down because they knew that they didn't necessarily want some of that stuff getting out into print, all the troubles that Gloria had and all that she had overcome and all those kinds of things. So, I can remember my photographer grabbing me in the parking lot. He was like, "Oh my God, that was just getting really good." And I was like, "I know, but it was really good." So that interview, and I was really lucky. I ended up winning a couple awards for the story that I wrote. And it was only because the material was so good. Like, there was no way I could screw it up because it was absolute gold.
That's awesome.
Well, Tom, to take a whole different direction in this, I am a big fan of your jam du jour that you post because your song of the day, I'm always like, what's Tom posting today? What do I got to listen to? So are you a big music fan, huh?
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, I probably get more feedback on that, to be honest with you, on Twitter than anything else. It's like, who cares what Baker did today? What's the jam du jour? So music has always been a huge part of my life. And, I'm the kind of, like one of my hobbies is just to go to concerts. So needless to say, the last 18 months have been absolute withdrawal, I think, for everybody that likes live music, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just try to, whatever hits me on a particular day, or, if I'm driving to Berea and some song comes on one of the random, Sirius radio channels, and I'll say, I haven't heard that song in a long time. And so I'll just post that. But yeah, I really enjoy it, Holly. Thanks for pointing it out.
Can I make a recommendation for tomorrow?
Okay, go ahead.
Everclear, Santa Monica.
Ooh. There's actually somebody else did a cover of that and did a pretty good job of it, or am I mistaken? I think that's a good track though. I actually heard a different Everclear song last week that I hadn't heard in a million years. That's the kind of thing that happens though, dude, is that
man.
I'll hear something like, "Oh man, that Gin Blossom song was pretty good." Like, let's bring that back. And I always try to listen, I'm a lot older than you guys are, so I can go back into the mid 70s in my, I graduated from high school in 79. And so I like to go back and relive those high school days, because all it takes is one of those songs to remind you of a party or, some of your first beers or whatever it was in high school.
So, Tom, I have a question for you. So for years, I've been listening to every Browns press conference, and you are always the first one called on. Is that an Associated Press thing, or is that just like a senior member of the media thing? I've always wondered this.
Senior member. Yeah, I really am dating myself. No, that's just kind of, I don't know, like when I first got here to Cleveland, I wanted to kind of, cut out my own path or whatever. And I didn't really, I didn't have the connections within the teams and stuff. So I just kind of started, I guess I was just a little pushy, maybe. I guess it was that kind of that New Yorker in me coming out. Because I'll tell you guys what, and I've talked to my Cleveland colleagues about this, the New York media is just a different world that goes on here in Cleveland. When you and I was on the Yankees and Mets beats for several years. And if we think baseball is a big deal here in New York, every game is a season. I mean, that's the way those games are dissected, especially by the New York tabloids. So I think just when I got here, I just started asking questions, and it got to the point where everybody was just kind of deferring to me. And so it just kind of stuck. So I enjoy it. And I appreciate when people point it out, because it's kind of my signature, if you will.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, Tom, with the media difference between a city like Cleveland and then versus, a city like New York. And, sometimes I see, at least on the Twitter banter back and forth, that, sometimes the Cleveland media gets a lot of heat for questions and stuff. And I just, it bothers me for you guys because I feel like you're asking the questions that people do want to know, and you have to ask the hard ones. And you're never going to be the favorite of a player. You're just not. So I guess, what do you got? What are your thoughts on that? And what would you have taken? I guess that is a great point, that you took kind of what you had in New York and kind of became that leader with it. So I would say that, Cleveland's actually a whole lot better to probably deal with than New York. I mean, you hear that all the time.
Yeah, I think sometimes and Holly, I could talk to you for an hour about this alone. A lot of time what fans forget is that, especially for those of us that, let's say, are covering the Browns on a daily basis, you can ask as tough a question as you want. And I've had to ask some really tough ones and some very uncomfortable ones, particularly when, a coach might be in the hot seat or something like that. And you've got to, you try to find the spot in the news conference where you're being respectful of somebody, understanding that they have a family, understanding that this is their career, but you got to ask that question, coach, you guys are 4-12. You just got beat by 38 points. Are you worried about your job security or whatever the case may be? But what I was going to say is, I think fans sometimes forget that we have to work with these people going forward. So while some fans, are like, why aren't you being more aggressive, or why aren't you ripping into so-and-so? Well, you can only do that so often, or you've got to really, pick your moments where you're going to be super critical. That's not to say, though, that we can't and we shouldn't hold these people accountable all the time, right? I mean, if somebody is playing poorly, if a GM has made bad decisions, whatever the case may be, those people owe it to us, and not only as the media, but because I am the conduit to the fans and to the season ticket holders out there. We demand answers, and that's why I think. And sometimes we do let people off the hook, and there's been plenty of times then where we regroup as a media and we're like, God dang, why didn't we ask such and such? I always tell people, especially young journalists, there's always 3 kinds of interviews, right? There's the one you plan to do, the one you do, and then the one you wish you did. I hate those times where I'll go back and I'll sit down and say, I should have asked, Pat Shurmur such and such, or Kevin Stefanski. I mean, and we can talk about him as well. He's a real challenge for a journalist to interview, because he's really buttoned down. You've got to find a way into asking, and it's all about the presentation. And I think that's true with just about, any athlete or any celebrity or what have you. It's in how you ask it as much as anything as to the response that you'll get. So, I think by and large, though, Holly, to your point, I think we do a pretty good job here in the Cleveland media. I do think sometimes we're a little soft. I think sometimes we're also a little hard and a little bit too critical. I can remember times where, I think we've ambushed players, after games and I think sometimes maybe not as sensitive as we should be about, their feelings. That's why, I'm always, and I was lucky enough, I've played sports my whole life and, played all high school and in part of college. And so I've always kind of taken the player's stance on a lot of things. And sometimes that's gotten in my way, though, too, because instead of being the journalist and being a little tougher, I think I'm a little too sensitive. I'll tell you what, when I lose a softball game now, I'm a bastard to talk to 20 minutes after the game.
Imagine a microphone
after softball.
Yeah. I mean, let alone had I just struck out, with 30,000 people in the stands in the 10th inning or something. So I try to be respectful at all times, and I think that's the best approach any journalist could take.
Tom, I have to ask, is there a group chat of all the media members? Do you guys have a group chat going?
There is no doubt a secret group chat.
No, there's no secrets really. We have group texts amongst the Browns writers and the Indians writers, and that's more of that is to let each other know kind of what's going on, or the Browns practice has been moved inside today, or just from a logistical standpoint.
It's amazing.
And I do have a couple of really good friends on the Browns beat, Scott Petrak and Nate Ulrich, who I both do a terrific job for their respective outlets. And the three of us always kind of try to brainstorm, particularly, going into an interview, let's say with, somebody did, like Odell Beckham Jr., right? Like, okay, what do we want to get out of this? And then so we'll all take our turns kind of, trying to get shots in any way we can to either soften them up and then or turn the interview in a direction that we want it to go. I'll give you guys for instance, on Sunday at the brown and orange and brown scrimmage, is that what it's called? At the stadium, Josh Allen had just signed that big contract extension with the Bills on Friday. And so we were all dying to know how Baker felt about it, right? So the first 4 or 5 questions were about, hey, Baker, what's it like to see the fans here, blah, blah, blah. And then I finally got around, and again, it's in the presentation, right? So I said to Baker, hey, I don't know if you noticed that one of your 2018 classmates hit the lottery last week. And I wanted to get a reaction out of him that way. So he knew I was coming from like a good place, that I'm not trying to, create a headline or anything. I wanted Baker to understand that I was trying to, I have to ask this question, Baker. Please understand that I have to ask this question.
Yeah.
Give him a chance to kind of take the question in the way he wanted to deliver the message before we got at him hard. And so anyway, so then afterwards, Scott grabbed me out in the corridor as we were walking out. He says, I kept waiting for you. Like, when are you going to ask that question? Because we needed to get there, because that was the news of the day, right?
Yeah.
So to your question, Holly, I mean, we do a lot of that stuff. We'll collaborate and try to find our best way to get the interview. Sometimes it is strength in numbers. That's kind of the best way to go.
Well, Tom, in case anyone in the Browns media circle is wondering, there is no Browns podcast group chat. So I just get that out there. We all do not talk to each other.
Good to know.
But yeah, hey, that was fantastic.
Yes.
Let's take a quick break and come back, and let's just dive deep into Browns, Tom. We'll be right back.
Looking for new insights on the Cleveland sports scene with a unique side of Cleveland sports history? Then you found the perfect podcast. I'm John Sable.
And I'm Scott Sable, and we're hosts of the Sable Brothers on the Baseline podcast, a podcast about Cleveland sports, but not your typical podcast about the land's sports teams. Join us as we embark on a journey of sharing a unique and historical side of Cleveland sports history with the help of some former Cleveland sports stars and other historical figures.
All right here on the Sable Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, I'm Gary.
And I'm Jason. Opening cards as a kid, no matter what was in the pack, you always had that stick of chewing gum. Well, it turns out Gary and I opened up a box of 86 Tops last year, and let me tell you, the chewing gum does not age well.
Join us on the Ball Card Show,
the sports podcast for the sports collector.
It's not a rumor, it's the truth. Ray Guy and Roder are back together again with the R&R podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We're going to talk Browns, we're going to talk Cavs, Indians, even if they're not playing well, which might happen. We're going to talk monsters, we're going to talk college football, you name it. When it comes to sports, Ray Guy and Roder, we're going to break it down for you as only we can. So make sure you join us right here on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey, it's Tito, host of the Premier Fantasy Podcast. Get all the news and analysis you need to dominate your fantasy league. I've been doing this as long as anybody in the business. I can help give you the edge in your leagues. It's the Premier Fantasy Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
For the Dennis Maniloff Show, I'll tap into my 40-plus years of following Cleveland sports and 30-plus years of writing and talking about them, so as to bring you informed opinions and analysis of your favorite players and teams. I also will monitor the national sports scene and, when warranted, step out of the toy department and into the real world. And I'll always be on the lookout for special guests. By all means, join us.
Hey there, this is Brent Spillin, co-host of a Swingin' a Tribe MLB podcast. Listen, we're just a couple of fans who love to talk everything Cleveland Indians baseball. If you're a fan like us, then this is the podcast for you. Go Tribe.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. We read one book a month and then we talk about it. Books like Stephen King's The Shining or Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. If you're on the hunt for book recommendations and enjoy sparkling conversation, come read along with us and then listen in.
Want to hear more about your favorite TV shows and movies that are on countless streaming services?
Then listen to Up Next with your new favorite hosts, me, Kristen Aviles,
and me, Christina Walter.
Every other week we'll highlight one genre, but 2 movies or TV shows, one old and one new.
We'll let you know what's hot and what's not from your favorite
or least favorite
streaming services.
And be sure to stay tuned to the end of each episode where we shout out an artist whose name you should know for their talent in the industry.
So follow us to stay up to date with your favorite hosts from Up Next,
a part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, this is Don Mike Mendoza, the host of the Producing While Asian podcast. Join us to listen in on conversations with everyone who identify from producers to non-producers who all are part of the AAPI community. There's all that and more on the Producing While Asian podcast here on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, my name is Sam Post, owner of Phenomenal CBD Store and PhenomenalCBD.com. That's like phenomenal, CBD.com. Tune in where we talk with experts about how the amazing hemp plant can make a difference for people's health and well-being from the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. I created this podcast to have hard conversations. Conversations that make us human but are also wildly uncomfortable. Conversations that help give voice to the voiceless and to the marginalized. Now you can listen to the entire first season on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Consider this your personal invitation to join the conversation.
All right, we are back. Orange Order. Tom Withers joining us. AP, Holly, Jeremy, and House. Tom, this is this the best time of the year right before the season starts? Everyone is just like chomping at the bit to get started. Fantasy football drafts are going on. It's just the whole world is our oyster. We have football all ahead of us until February. This is the best time.
Yes and no. I think all of us have learned over the last 18 months that time is standing still and flying by at the same time, right? So I don't like to look too far into the future, but to your point, yeah, we're all like chomping at the bit. Like, can September 12th get here fast enough, right? So, yeah, it's a great time of the year. I think, this is a season that Browns fans have waited for a generation, right? Let's be honest. I mean, the last 20 years have been, with the exception of 2007 and last year, have been really difficult. And, I think finally in Baker and in Kevin Stefanski and in Andrew Berry and in Miles Garrett and Nick Chubb, I mean, they've got
keep going. This is fun.
I'm excited. I'll give you the 4 pillars of the building, right? And then you can add some other parts. Yeah. But in those people, and Paul DePodesta, I think his contribution over the last couple of years cannot be overlooked. If not for Paul DePodesta, Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry probably are not here. So
that's right.
And we're cycling through another coach and another GM and God only knows what. So yeah, it's exciting, man. And we're knocking on the door. It's just about here.
Tom, I have to know, you are in that facility every day. You are, and you've been in that facility for a long time, for many years, every day. What's the feeling now this year? Last year was such a strange year with COVID. You weren't in. Everything was so limited. And of course, it was the year that just shit finally took off with the Browns, right? So now that you're there every day, what's the general feeling? What can you tell us about what's the energy like? What's the interaction with the players? It feels like even watching Wyatt Teller's press conference today, like his just genuine proud and happiness of where he's at, being able to do what he wants to do with the guys that he loves. So tell me a little bit more about that. What's the feeling around camp and just being inside that actual facility?
Yeah, well, technically, Holly, we're still not in the facility because of protocols. We still can't go in there. So
Oh, you can't. But you went in today or what?
no, so we were in the field house.
Oh, in the field house. Okay.
Wear masks in there today. So just to back up for a second. So we have to be COVID tested every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And every day we are put through, the standard, take your temperature, ask all the questions, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have to wear special, there's only about, I think 15 or 20 of us that are allowed to be on the perimeter of the field on a daily basis. We wear special credentials that have a beeper on them, and that would allow anybody that's not in the same tier as us, it would signal if somebody was too close, that was unvaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still not what it was.
It's amazing.
It's the first time we had to resort back to Zooms for the first time in a long time, and that kind of sucked, but we're also used to it now. But the vibe in general, though, Holly, I mean, you can still feel the buzz out there. Having fans out there this summer, unlike last summer, has been a big change. And then, when we do talk to the players, we are allowed to do that in person. So they bring them over individually. And listen, these guys know they're good. They know that this is a really good team. You have to look far. I mean, you stand there on the sideline, and it wasn't too long ago where you would look out there and you could only identify one or two players on each side of the ball, if that were, Pro Bowl caliber players. Now, my God, there's a dozen of them, right? And when you look at a guy like, you look at the new guys that came here, look at Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, that's a guy that Browns fans have been salivating over for years. He's on the team. And not only on the team, he's on a bookend with Myles Garrett, who could arguably be the best player in the league if he can stay healthy. And then when you look at the offense, Beckham hasn't even been out there with that group yet. But I always tell people this as well. When you see Odell Beckham Jr. in person running routes, you get it. You start to understand why that guy is regarded as one of the freaky athletes on the planet. He's sick. He's like from another galaxy. Like the way he runs and the way he cuts is just something else. So, knock on wood for Browns fans, he's able to stay healthy because he will contribute. Listen, he will contribute just by putting on his cleats. I mean, he doesn't have to do anything other than walk out there on the field, and a defense has to account for him. So if you've got 2 of the 11 having to account for number 13, well, guess what? That leaves a lot of open room for 24 and 27 and 80 and that group of tight ends. And so they're talented, man. There's no doubt about it. And so there's a vibe and there's a buzz, and hopefully someday we'll get back to the facility, but even on the outside, it feels pretty special.
So Tom, even all those stars you just named, everything going for the Browns right now, is there somebody who's flying under the radar who you think is going to have a big impact this year that fans might not be thinking about right now?
Well, I think everybody's thinking about Donovan Peoples-Jones because he's been kind of the star of camp. I'll say, as another guy to keep an eye on offense is Harrison Bryant. The second-year tight end out of Florida Atlantic he's really emerging. He had a couple of nice touchdown catches again today, and he was really good on Sunday down at the stadium. So he's somebody that is really intriguing. He admitted to us yesterday that he put on 13 pounds of muscle in the offseason because he said there were moments out there when he was blocking last year and he was locked up against J.J. Watt, and he said, good God, I got no chance. I better get stronger or I'm going to have a very short career. So, and as you guys know, in Stefanski's offense, there's a premium put on tight ends and their ability to block, let alone pass catch. So to me, Bryant is a guy to keep an eye on. I'll tell you the other guy, the last draft pick they had, Felton, the kid from UCLA, he's got a gear about him, and they've had him back receiving kickoffs and also on punt return. And he's just got like that special twitch about him that, when he catches the ball and just decides to go laterally and then turn it upfield, he's got something to him. So yeah, I mean, as far as under the radar, those are the 2 that jump to mind right now. Defensively, been so impressed with Mack Wilson and the way he's come on lately. He was a guy that, even a month ago, people were like, thinking about the veterans that could end up being cut. And we were talking about Mac Wilson. Well, if you've watched him out there lately, I mean, there's no reason why he's not going to be in the starting lineup. He looks fantastic. I will say though, guys, and we can talk about it, I'm a little worried about the injury situation. I know there's still a month to go before the opener, but they've had a lot of guys they were counting on. And I'm talking about, Grant Delpit and Ronnie Harrison and others that have been on the sideline now for a long time. And Denzel Ward is on that list as well. So they need to get healthy quick.
Tom, I heard a couple people say today that you can just tell a difference in the way practices are structured under Coach Stefanski than coaches of the past. Do you get that sense that there's just no wasted time, that everything's just more efficient now?
Yeah, they don't miss a trick. And the efficiency in going from drill to drill, and it helps to keep in mind too, when you've got a guy like Bill Callahan as your offensive coach, he was an NFL head coach. He knows what he's doing. Joe Woods, who was in San Francisco, he knows what he's doing. Stefanski and Barry have done a really nice job of assembling a really good staff. And so I think that plays into it. I think, some of those regimes, whether it was Hugh Jackson or Freddie Kitchens and Pat Shurmur, Eric Mangini, whoever it may be, and all due respect to those guys, because I liked all of them. And I got along with most of them very well. They had young staffs because a lot of times, they were kind of like either a last second hire or a hire that the Browns, right. They're like third or fourth on the wish list. Right. And so by the time they got hired, that talent pool of coaches that they wanted to bring in with them was not existent. Well, this time, because of the timing of everything, they were able to get in some of the best assistant coaches in the NFL. So I think, Jeremy, that has a lot to do with how well you see practice run. And it is, everything is just right on the ball, and they just go from one to the next. And they're not fooling around doing silly things. Like, I don't know if you guys watched Hard Knocks last night. Mike McCarthy has got this mojo moment that he's doing. It just comes across as just cheesy and sophomoric and not up to NFL standards. And you don't see any of that kind of stuff with the Browns. They're getting work done. And as you guys have probably heard Stefanski say a million times, it's all about work. And that word, from what I understand, I haven't been in the building for a while, Holly, but from what I understand is that word is written on every wall in every corner that there is. So it's all about work, and they're getting it done.
Yeah, one of my favorite phrases of Stefanski's was "embrace the suck." Last year it was just that's what you had to do. There was no other way around it. But I want to ask you too, as a forever Browns fan, we always are in the back of our heads, the what ifs, right? So would you say at this point, is there anywhere you feel like we are lacking, that we don't have a lot of depth in any type of position where you think that we really need to get help? I know on the defensive side, there are injuries, and that is a little concerning. A month feels like it's far, but it's really not that far away. And depending on with the injuries and how they end up turning out, but where are there any other position in any other places that you think that we could use some work?
Well, since you brought it up, I think the defensive end and the defensive tackle situation is worth watching. And I bring that up because Takk McKinley is out, and we don't know when he's coming back. We don't know if he's coming back. And he was a guy that was really going to be counted on. I think if people forget that before Clowney was signed, people were talking about McKinley as possibly being, the guy that would replace Olivier Vernon and be that bookend for Myles Garrett. So, because once you get beyond, Takk McKinley, you start getting into the, Porter Gustin did a really nice job last year, and I thought he played very well. He's a real young player, though, and he's not an established player. And then inside, I worry a little bit, too, about the depth at defensive tackle. You've got some young guys that you may have to put into the rotation, whether it's Tommy Togiai from Ohio State or, Elliott, who was a draft pick last year, who played pretty well, who played more snaps than I even realized last year. So that defensive line scares me a little bit. And I also worry then along those lines about Clowney. Clowney's history over the last to stay on the field. And, here we are in training camp. And I think while these are probably, veteran days off, that, you really got to be careful with him. I think they got to really, and I think that's what Browns fans need to keep in mind as we think about the expectations of this season, it's a long season. It's longer than ever. It's 17 games this time. And if things start to go a little, awry in the first month, if they're at the end of October and they're at 500, I wouldn't push the panic button, because you know what? It matters what they are from December 1st on. So, there's going to be ups and downs in any season. There always are. And, I know some people think this team's capable of going 14-3, and they very well might, but they could also go 11-6 and sneak in as a wild card. You just never know. And, Carson Wentz goes down, and then what do you got? God forbid Baker Mayfield goes down and Case Keenum's in there. Not to say Case Keenum's a bad quarterback, but he's not Baker Mayfield. So injuries are always a huge part of it that none of us can control.
So news came out that Baker will not be playing on Saturday against the Jaguars. And that is just a few days away. This is the first season Baker's had, and some of these younger players have the same coach, same system. Yeah. Are they looking just to get out of preseason without any injuries, or are they really looking to add on to what they built last year? What are you thinking their mindset is going into these 3 games?
I'll be honest with you guys. I don't think you're going to see any starters on Saturday. I think they're going to completely take a look at what they have in terms of depth. So what Holly was just bringing up is what they're going to do is let's see what we got in a worst case scenario. God forbid that we lose Miles or Clowney or whatever the case may be. Who do we got that we can plug in there that we can get through a few games? So I think that's what you're going to see now. And because of, all these soft tissue injuries, I mean, the Browns right now have 6 guys out with hamstring injuries. And that's been kind of a trend around the league. And I don't know if that is because of, last year and the pandemic and guys training differently or whatever the case may be, but it's a thing. And it's a thing that they're going to have to keep an eye on. So I think these 3 games are really going to be nothing more than glorified practices for the second and third guys and the guys trying to make the roster. I think you'll probably see more of the starters play next week in those 2 practices against the Giants than you will see them in the preseason games. It's just not worth the risk anymore. I'll be honest with you guys. I think they could eliminate the preseason. And I know for a long time, the NFL has just wanted to have that because it's a way of, making some more money, getting the brand out there, making the NFL, front page news all the time. It's just not worth it anymore. And you talk to any of these coaches, they'd gladly go from now until the first game right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Tom, the most important question of the night. How do you get an invite to the RV that's back on campus, I hear?
That's
a great
RV,
question.
Baby. Yeah, I'm going to have to try to work something on that.
We need a hard-hitting news story, all access pass, Tom. You need to get in there and you need to give us the goods.
I'll see what I can do tomorrow. We're probably not going to talk to Baker for a little while, though, so it's going to have to be one of the quarterbacks. So we'll try to find out from Stefanski exactly what's going on out there. But it's kind of cool, though. I mean, that's the one thing, too, guys, that I'll tell you that, and you probably heard Wyatt Teller talking about it today, and it's genuine. These guys really like each other. They've got a really good group of players. And that's, for me, that's what I miss more than anything else. Listen, it wouldn't kill me if I didn't spend another minute in a baseball clubhouse or a NBA locker room again, because we spend a lot of time there standing around and wasting time. But it does allow you, though, to really get a feel for a team and how much they care for each other and how hard they're willing to work for each other. And you see that in practice with this Browns team. They've got great guys on that front line. Joel Bitonio is as good a guy as I've ever covered. I mean, he's just a wonderful person. And you can see that Teller's got a bigger than life personality, right? And Conklin, while he's quiet, is a really nice guy. And then you look at character was a big thing in the guys they drafted this year. Mm-hmm. And when you see guys like, Jarvis Landry, who in my mind is the heart and soul of this team, if not Nick Chubb. I mean, they're 1 and 1A in those terms, as far as I'm concerned. So this team really gets along. I think they, again, as I mentioned earlier, they know they're good. They know they got a chance to win it all. And again, knock on wood, they stay healthy, and there's no reason to see there's no reason to think that they're not going to be in the mix right at the end.
Yeah, I agree. I think Jarvis Landry is that kind of like ingredient X that started this whole movement, but I think Baker knows how to leverage all that to create this team, because I think you can have heart and souls. I think you can have like, oh, they're the face of the team, but you have to have someone to bring it all together and someone that can really like stir it up and make it what it is. And that was Baker as advertised. He did that Oklahoma, and that's what Baker does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, I'll tell you guys today. So they were doing like red zone drills indoors, and so it's really compact to begin with. And MJ Stewart, one of the cornerbacks, took a pretty hard fall and banged his head and got up. But you could tell, like, okay, he was definitely dealing with something. The trainers didn't come on the field, but you could hear Baker yell, like, "You got this, MJ," from the other end of the field. And then when the drill ended, to your point, Baker went out of his way to come over, pat him on the back, make sure he was okay. So he's thinking about those things. And I think that's the one, and I'm actually going to do a feature on Baker. I had a chance to sit down with him a couple of weeks ago down at the Rock Hall when he did that commercial shoot with Alice Cooper. And I got some time with him. And the theme of my story is just going to be this mature Baker Mayfield. He took his lumps in year 2 and it comes back. And under the influence of Kevin Stefanski, he's more of a leader, more of a franchise face, more of the guy than he's ever been. And so, all the ingredients are there.
Well,
Tom, you're getting me excited.
I know. I got to go take a cold shower, man.
Giving me the butterflies. I can't help it.
Gosh, freaking pumped. Well, hey, that wraps it up for this episode of the Orange is Orange and Browns podcast. Thank you all so much for downloading and listening. Shouts to the Press Play Podcast Network for making this possible. Visit PressPlayPodcast.com for sponsorship info and see how you could host a show on our network. Shouts to Holly and Jeremy, and shouts to Tom. Tom, thank you so much, dude. You are awesome. Welcome back anytime, sir.
You're welcome. We'll definitely do it again.
For the USA.